Yeah, it was just absolutely monstrous. And I wanted to bring this up as a topic because of your perspective in finance and how people are in these situations in varying degrees of desperation, looking out at what this idea of home means. Does it simply mean a sense of safety, a place to land, or is it their legacy, And whether you're motivated out of desperation or you're motivated for other reasons, you're still vulnerable to some financial traps. And I was really curious about, your experiences within the run-up to actually securing housing and what people might be able to watch out for.
The content presented and discussed is purely intended to be general and educational in nature and should not be construed as specifically tailored investment, financial planning, tax, legal, psychological diagnosis, or other professional advice.
Well, hello. Thank you all for joining us for another episode of Ask My Man Manny with our co-hosts, Abbey Durkin, as well as Manny Henson. That's who you're hearing right now on this nice, lovely Friday. And so I had this big kind of thought, of having a show that's really dedicated on housing. Everyone has an opinion. There's some things that are always different. They're relatively unique to each location. But let's talk about it, And I kind of want to start with you, Abby. I think having kind of an understanding in a place that home has in your psychology, in your mind, because you're making a decision. You're going to make a decision to live somewhere, and it's very important. It's not just the dollars and cents, but where does that come from? And what do you think homeowners' opinions have been over the long term?
Yeah, home is such a loaded concept. So, I was trucked around as a military kid for most of my childhood, and I never could answer that question, where are you from? And then as an adult, I ended up joining the service myself and still couldn't answer the question because everywhere that I was, it didn't feel like home. Everything felt really transient. So then when I had finally gotten out of uniform, I was starting to explore things like the VA benefits for homeownership, the VA home loan specifically, because when I got out of the military, I just kind of had nothing. It was a starting over, and I feel like I've started over in my life and reinvented myself more times than I can count. So I'm looking into this VA home loan, and it seemed really straightforward. So I don't know, I was early 30s and I had a baby, single mom, and I thought, I can do this. But life doesn't exactly happen in a way that is convenient, And I just always had this idea that homeownership was something that old people did. And I never saw myself as an old person, I was 30 and I felt like an old soul, but 18 at the same time. And when you're doing something for the first time, it can be really scary. And I ended up having to go down the road of the VA home loan process much, much faster because I had transitioned out of the military into a civilian job. And what they didn't really talk about when I went through my transition program was the sticker shock, because in uniform, you get BAH, which is like your basic housing allowance. And then you might get locality pay depending on where you're at. Well, as soon as you transition out, that money disappears. So I thought, okay, well, I was fortunate enough to get a really good job as a contractor, a DoD contractor. I was making 3 times what I was making on active duty. And I thought, this is going to be a breeze, right? Not so much. So when I got out of uniform, I'm in this apartment in DC. And the other thing I didn't know, and again, this is like a 30-year-old Abbykins, what I didn't know was the tax situation. right? So DC is famous for what? Taxation without representation. So I was getting clobbered and
Right.
I was losing over 50% of my paycheck every single month. I couldn't make rent. Yeah, I literally could not make rent. And I had to make this really drastic decision about I have to pursue homeownership. And so it was out of desperation. I had nothing saved. I was going in it absolutely raw, trying to figure things out because I was still working full time, of course. And so, I'm doing as much research as I possibly can, trying to get smart on this so I don't get absolutely rickrolled by a realtor. And so I'm going through as much info and information as I can find. And I get a hold of this realtor through the bank that I was using. They had this like partnership. So I explained to her my situation. And this was in 2009, 2009. So the bubble, right? Do you remember the bubble of '09
Like it was yesterday.
for the housing? Yeah. Yeah. And so that was the market. It was absolutely a seller's market. And so here I was, brand new to the VA home loan system, brand new to this idea that I was actually going to buy a house somewhere. And I was getting just like dragged all over town, looking at places that were absolutely terrifying. Because what I also had to learn the hard way was that there is this like Venn diagram between affordability, safety, and convenience in terms of commuting. And if you get the center of that Venn diagram, you've got a ton of money. And I did not. And so one of those circles had to pop. And I couldn't sacrifice safety at all. And I just couldn't sacrifice any more money, because I didn't have anything. So the thing that had to get sacrificed was the commuting distance. So I ended up like landing on this property that was an hour and a half away from my office.
Wow.
By car. And it was safe, it was affordable, but it was an hour and a half away. And I had made my choice, but at the closing, there was so many hidden fees, there was so many requests for more money. And so I was panicking, but my realtor, she saw the struggle. And she actually ended up, she waived her commission.
Mm.
She waived her commission at closing so that my son and I could get this house because we were not going to be able to afford the place where we were at. And it was just absolute madness. And honestly, I mean, I was friends with her. I was friends with her for years after that because what she did was absolutely heroic. But like there's just so many financial pitfalls when you move through homeownership. And I know, my story is just one of a million. It had kind of a happy ending in that we were able to secure some housing for ourselves, but it was through the kindness of strangers that happened. And it would not have happened without Jamie Yu. Without Jamie Yu coming through, it literally wouldn't have happened. And then without my sister sending me this like crazy check that I had to turn around and give right back. Like I couldn't even touch it. I just had to show the check. I just had to show that I had received funds and then turn around and give it straight back to her. Yeah, it was just absolutely monstrous. And I wanted to bring this up as a topic because of your perspective in finance and how people are in these situations in varying degrees of desperation, looking out at what this idea of home means. Does it simply mean a sense of safety, a place to land, or is it their legacy, And whether you're motivated out of desperation or you're motivated for other reasons, you're still vulnerable to some financial traps. And I was really curious about, your experiences within the run-up to actually securing housing and what people might be able to watch out for.
That is a really good question. And so I have few worksheets that I work with my clients on leading up to purchasing a home. And so I'll give them 4 different unique numbers. I'll give them the walkaway number. I'll give them the number that they can afford and the number that they can pay for the house where they can stay within their budget that they're paying already for housing, and another budget, a number for the zip codes that they're looking at. And so they can compare those 4 and kind of come to the negotiation table with some ideas of what they can afford and what's within their budget, because you can always blow that up, right? You know, what your bank tells you can afford is probably not the number that you want to have and kind of end up house poor, where you're sacrificing all the other things just to keep a roof over your head. And so what I also want to say is another thing is, and this is going to be controversial, right? I firmly believe that the first thing you need to focus on when you're finishing your master's, when you're finishing your degree program, or whatever the case may be, is obtaining, 1, idea what you want to do, 2, some level of proficiency in the track record of doing what you do, so that if we ever have like a 2010, that nothing is promised, but you have some level of confidence that you can be employed within a short matter of time, and then that you are where you want to be. Classic example, I changed jobs probably about 4 times, and every single time I made more money than the job I had prior. And so a lot of that happened because I wasn't thinking about in the negotiation, of where, of the job that I was taking, where I could live. I could up and move wherever I want. And this is way before Airbnb, and a lot of the other options that are available for homeowners. It's just more popular. But I think in the early part of your career, really the focus is, accumulating some liquidity. And of course, my real estate people are probably going to be up in arms. A permanent solution is good for permanent problems. I don't disagree. Housing makes sense for most people in the long term. But, long term, everyone is dead. So, you have these exogenous episodes like 2000.
Yeah.
You have 2020 where people are renting homes and they're not getting any rent for. And so there's always these rare occasions where rules of thumb don't matter. And so giving yourself a quick cushion, not just on the cash flow side, but the job and the career side makes sense.
So I've got another question for you. How would you suggest that people structure their behavior in a bubble?
That is a great question. Here's kind of the history of it. You got to kind of also understand the history of it and the leverage that's involved with owning a home. But we got to start there first. So in 1950, your family, about 50% of your money went to home goods and, living in your house. The real estate market really wasn't a market where there's huge bubbles because you had to pay 50% down. And so, think about the Monopoly game, right? When you flip the card over, that you only got 50% of what you paid. That wasn't just the game. That was the real estate market. They would come into your house. They would talk to you. There was a lot of underwriting. And so you had a mortgage that was in most cases affordable with some leeway. And those who could buy, were the only people at the table. And so, that's the big thing. Now, over some period of time, the country's housing policy changed, right? We wanted to get people a leg up. You have the baby boomers coming out of World War II and, needing some place to live. And, so we had these projects where we created a whole lot of homes in suburbia. And that's kind of the birth of suburbia. So over that time as well, bankers wanted to get more money. And so they were thinking about, let's create more flexibility. And so you had mortgages starting to be paid for by the government sponsored entities like Ginnie Mae, Fannie Mae, FMHLC, VA. And there was a huge bargaining that went to lower the collateral requirements. And so you had at that point a huge explosion in liquidity. You no longer had to have 50% of the money down on the home. And if you really think about it, for every dollar you purchase, let's say 5% is your payment down, the inverse of that is 20. So for every dollar you have $20 you can buy, you can have, or $19 you can have from the government to buy a home. And I say the government because the government owns actually 80% of all the mortgages that we get. We are technically making real estate purchases with money that the government gives us and promises at least. So what you have is you have people that are, some people are making good decisions. You have people who go into homes they can afford, maybe have more than 5%, or they have modest expectations on the house they can afford over time. And so whereas there's a connection, direct connection. I'm getting to answer your question.
No, this is fascinating. Yeah, I'm really enjoying the history here. Thank you.
Yeah. So whereas there was a direct connection between wages and real estate prices, which was in 1980, let's say 3.5 national income. So if you had a family making $50,000 in that area, they would have a home of $175,000, right? And so that's a really reasonable number, right? It sounds like a lot. That is, I looked at my grandmother's and my grandfather's mortgage. I remember seeing a stub for like $132 or something ridiculous like that in the 80s.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that was
wow.
That was it. Now, after a period of time, and there's a hedge fund manager, which I really, really think everyone should follow, who kind of gives a really good story. And so I'm not inventing this, I'm just paraphrasing, kind of give you an idea of the brief history in the mortgage market. Over time, banks found, very lucrative to make these loans, right? And then so what happens, you go ahead and you get the loan. The servicer takes a piece of the money, and the servicer turns around and says to Ginnie Mae, or VA in this case, all right, here's the loan, here's the pricing, give me the money back for the loan, right? I'm making it simple. And so what you have is the VA guaranteeing loans. So it's almost like getting your parents' credit card to buy stuff. They have better credit rating. Mm-hmm. And for that reason, they're going to give you lower rates and lower rates that you can afford. And so everyone kind of felt that was, mission for the country, and that made a lot of sense. The problem is if you're the servicer and you're making the money off the front end and you don't have any downside to making loans because there's always someone behind you to buy them for you. There's no coincidence they call banks stores. You can make the loans you want. Obviously there's rules and there's some regulations around it. There's different types of government sponsor entities that took specific qualities of mortgages. There's also the private sector was buying mortgages. But for the most part, it was the GSEs, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, VA, FMHLC, a couple of the others. And so you have real estate prices blow up, right? Instead of having your dollar buy $2 worth of a house, you now have $1 buying $20 worth of a house. And so if everyone's coming to the table, you have this huge growth of prices. Now, the problem with that is incomes didn't raise at the same time. So you have a higher multiple. So if you're a real estate speculator from the 80s to 20s, real estate is the best thing that ever happened to you. Real estate has made more wealth in our society than businesses, or pretty close to private equity, depending on where you're counting. So it's a class, it's an asset class, but a lot of it's dependent on leverage and where small prices go. To sum it all up as well, is the other key piece of this whole equation is estimates on values. So estimates, you're looking at the estimate of what you have to pay on your down payment in your home you're thinking about buying based on the day that was there. So your mortgage says you got to put down 5% or 0%. You just have to pay your closing costs if you're looking at a VA loan. You get in a home and your mortgage is already set. However, in a commercial real estate market, it's completely your payment and what you have to have as collateral is completely dependent on market. And so there's a feedback loop. So, most cases let's say if a big company wants to borrow millions of dollars for property, the people don't look at you like you're buying a mortgage like they do as an individual. They say, wait a minute, we need to get some kind of protections. They do what's called a bond covenant. And in most bond covenants for corporations, it says you have to maintain equity of 20% or 50%, whatever the case may be. And when that market price drops, they have to either come up with more collateral. You see where I'm going with this? They have to get up more collateral or they have to sell property. And so over time, you had the savings and loans crisis in 1990. You had plenty of other regional banks that went under. You have tech stock bubble, because now you can borrow money from the $19 in equity that you have on a second loan, pull out cash whenever the market goes up and buy in the stock market or buy something else, right? And so it feeds the leverage, and you have over investments in different places. I strongly believe that you should look at what the multiple is of your own personal income and dictate based on the safety that you're on. So if you have, and right now is maybe 7 times earnings nationwide, I think that's a sense that overall it's a little bit high because it's a lot higher than long-term trend. And if without the denominator, that nationwide income increasing, then I don't see their justification for an increase in the numerator, which is the housing prices. So making a long story short, I would say buy REITs. If you really want to buy real estate, don't buy more house than you don't need. You have access to real estate in other different ways. Be a person who is okay with waiting long periods of time to get your money back if you buy at the wrong time. And then buy a home for the things that a home does, which is providing a roof over your head and some long-term safety of what you have to pay. Because all the things that the upside kind of potential that people talk about on the upside on the home prices is completely the same as when you do, looking at renting. Prices go down at your next renewal. You can look at real estate prices. You see multifamily homes have lower prices, and you can negotiate a rate lower. And so there is some symmetry between housing prices, the volatility of that, and rents. And, it's not really appreciated. And then you have explosions of multifamily homes in the Southwest, the Bible Belt. And it's just my sense that, especially in the multifamily home space, there's a lot of hot money there, a lot of real estate investors who didn't know what they were doing, coming in late. I've heard anecdotal stories of real estate brokers in certain places not having commissions in a year and a half. And so that's, you have a couple of banks going under, like this second or third largest regional bank going under, the Federal Reserve having to make changes and the FDIC's mandate. And so that's not natural in an efficient market. And so what we've been able to do in the savings and loan crisis in the 1990s, the banking crisis in 2009, is use the government debt to take the bad debts. But we have to pay interest on those debts. And so we're running, when you borrow money, you have to pay it back plus interest, and it's crowding out investment in other things. And so, I've heard anecdotal this debt cycle was 100 years. The last time you had, it's coming off the gold standard a couple other major international financial implications. And so, that's the fear.
I think from a consumer's perspective, what I'm hearing is if you are in a housing bubble, number one thing you can do is, and if you're desperate and you've got to go, you've got to get a house.
Why do you have to get a house?
Well, in one situation, like the one that I was describing, you're like me and my son, we found ourselves, we were transitioning out of the military and he was tiny, he was kindergartner.
Right.
We literally could not afford the apartment that we were in because the taxes were, the taxes in DC were excessive. I was losing over 50% of my paycheck. And I knew that I had a VA home loan benefit just sitting there.
I see.
We couldn't stay where we were at.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. We couldn't stay where we were at. And so and this might be, we for sure have to do a couple episodes about military money.
Yeah. This has to be a multiple episode.
Yeah, for sure. And so, again, we're talking about 30-year-old me saying, "Oh my God, I've got to jump." So I had to jump, but I was jumping in a bubble. And I kind of did what you're describing. Like I went for the absolute cheapest house that I could afford that was safe, sacrificing commuting distance. So if you've got to get a house, what I'm hearing is, go for the most affordable. Don't let your ego get in the way, because you are in a bubble and you either can get a small house, an affordable house, and wait it out, because you're talking about some important things like symmetry and patience. So while you're waiting, buy small. But the other topic that, but the other topic I think that we've got to hit on next time is the closing costs. Because what I also didn't know as a first-time homeowner was that I needed almost as much money to buy the house as I did to sell it, because guess when I had to get out of that house? Yeah. Right. In 2012. So I bought at a bubble and I sold at a loss. Like it was horrific.
So, if you're a salesperson, the time to buy is always today, because you're thinking about your commission. That's just frankly it, and so the challenge is looking past short-term goals of having the feel and the fear of not having the fear of missing out need to be weighed against the long-term implications of the decision you're making. How stable is your job? Do you understand that you're going to pay 3 times the house in interest? Do you understand that, you're still going to be renting something? You're going to be renting the money that you pay down. You only own 5% of a home if you're putting 5% down. You got to treat it like that. And so I look at a home ownership as, roof over your head, perhaps, long-term investment opportunity over 20, 30 years. But, I would not guarantee, I would not do it speculatively. I wouldn't borrow money to do it as an investor at this point. And, I think most people don't understand that. And so what happens is you have all these, real estate developer shows. They tell you, well, you can get this by not doing that and not putting a whole bunch of money down. And, I became a real estate developer and blah, blah, blah. What they don't tell you is that, all right, they had 20% down on commercial property. Once it got up around 30%, they pulled out equity out of that one and then put it in the next one and then did the same thing over and over and over again. Yes, that's possible. The problem is when prices go down, it's going to come down like a, house of cards. There's just way too much leverage. Leverage works both ways. It can help you. It can also hurt double the downside.
Yeah. And I guess my last point, and this would be another episode, but during the pandemic, during lockdown, several of my friends that were bored out of their mind decided that they were going to become day traders, right? So there was this surge of people that had a lot of time on their hands, that were understimulated intellectually, and took up these really complicated financial hobbies. And people got into real estate who had no business being in real estate. And they were like, well, this is the next move, right? So when people are making these decisions about housing, whether it's a bubble or no, not a bubble, I think it's really important to get a history of who you're actually talking to, because we don't necessarily know who got smart on this just because there was a pandemic versus who actually has all the experience to see the ins and outs of this gigantic decisions that they're making.
Yeah, I think if you treat market making as a job, it could pay you like a job. Emphasis on if you treat it like a job. And I think that's it for today. I think what we'll do is we'll finish that conversation. I'll go over the history of market making, give you an ancient history reason for why we have complexity and what we do and why we even have securities markets. It's an ancient answer. So to a problem, it's an ancient question.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty.
Bye.
Take care.
The content presented and discussed is purely intended to be general and educational in nature and should not be construed as specifically tailored investment, financial planning, tax, legal, psychological diagnosis, or other professional advice. Any data cited is valid as of the date of presentation, but please know that such data are frequently subject to change. Any investment performance referenced is purely past performance, which is no guarantee of any future performance. Nothing contained in this course should be construed as an offer to sell, a solicitation of an offer to buy, or a recommendation of any security or other financial product or investment strategy. All investment, tax, and financial planning strategies involve risk that you should be prepared to bear. Investment, financial planning, tax, legal, and other professional advice is specific to each individual and entity, and you are highly encouraged to consult with professionals of your choosing before taking any action based on the contents presented or discussed herein.